Hey guys, tonight we slip through the crooked door of time and into the shadowy glow of a medieval tavern. It's late, but late feels different here where hours are measured by the dying candle and the cooling embers in the hearth. The air is thick with wood smoke, the tang of spilled ale, and the quiet hum of voices that never seem to want to go home. You're standing in the threshold, cloaked in the damp chill of a cobbled street, and the firelight paints your boots a dusty gold. This place might seem warm and inviting now, but remember, sanitation is not a priority. You probably won't survive this century without catching something you can't pronounce. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door creaks as you step inside, and immediately the world changes. The street behind you dissolves into a damp whisper, replaced by the uneven rumble of boots and clogs over wide planks. The tavern floor slopes slightly toward the center, worn down by centuries of stomping feet. You feel it under you, an almost imperceptible lean that makes the long tables tilt just enough for stray drops of ale to trickle toward your knees if you're careless. It's not large, not by your modern standards. The ceiling hovers low, a dark, smoke-stained canopy of beams so close you could reach up and run your fingers along the grooves carved by generations of knives and nails. Thick beams crisscross the air above your head, every inch of them blackened and glossy with the varnish of centuries' candle soot cooking smoke, and the oils from countless curious hands. The walls are half timber and half wattle and daub, patched here and there where the plaster has crumbled to reveal the rib cage of the building. A few crude benches line them, their surfaces uneven, worn to a dull shine, where backs and elbows have polished them smooth. Between these benches, heavy trestle tables squat in the middle of the room. They're not arranged in neat rows, more like a jumble, as though each had been dragged into place for a different purpose at a different time. Some are littered with dice, others with trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates piled high with scraps of boiled meat and onions. The light here is dim but warm. It seeps from two main sources, the great open hearth at one end of the room, and a scattering of tallow candles set into iron wall sconces. The hearth is enormous, nearly large enough to walk into, and the fire within it roars with a lazy, steady heat. You can hear the hiss of damp logs and the occasional pop that sends sparks leaping upward into the soot-heavy chimney. Suspended from a hook is a blackened cauldron, its contents bubbling lazily. The smell, savory, a little sour, suggests a perpetual stew that's been fed for days, maybe weeks. In taverns like this, such a pot never truly empties. Ingredients are simply added as needed, a timeless recipe shaped by whatever the market and the customers have brought in. Near the hearth, a few locals occupy the choicest seats, stools carved from single blocks of wood, their legs worn thin by centuries of shuffling. They huddle close, swapping gossip in low tones you can't quite follow. The language is familiar only in rhythm, a rolling cadence punctuated by laughter and the dull thud of mugs striking wood. Your eyes wander toward the bar, though bar might be a generous word. It's really just a long plank set atop barrels with more barrels behind it. No polished counter, no shelves of neatly labeled bottles. The tavern keeper, a stout woman with forearms like oak branches, stands there wiping the rim of a clay cup with what might once have been a clean cloth. Behind her, earthen jugs and wooden casks are stacked haphazardly, their contents written in chalk on bits of slate. Ale is the drink of choice here, though. There might be a jug or two of rough cider, and perhaps, if you know the right words, a measure of something stronger distilled in secrecy. The air is not silent, but its noise is thick and slow like molasses. A few conversations in one corner, the shuffling of feet, the distant bray of a mule outside. Somewhere in the back, a lone musician plucks at a lute, the notes wandering away like lazy fireflies. It's not a performance, just a habit sound for the sake of sound. You make your way to an empty bench, the wood groaning under your weight. The table before you is scarred with cuts and burns, a battlefield of remembered meals and heated arguments. You can almost see the ghost images of travelers before you, merchants, soldiers, and weary farmers, each with their own reasons for coming here. For some, the tavern is a place of reunion, for others, an escape. And for a rare few, it's where fortunes are made or lost with the toss of a bone die. A serving boy appears at your elbow, barefoot, hair a tangle. He offers a chipped cup filled with ale the color of weak tea. You take it, noting the weight of the clay and the faint warmth from the hearth it's absorbed. The ale tastes young, almost green, with a faint sourness that lingers. It's not unpleasant, but it's nothing like the clean, crisp lagers you know. In truth, this brew is safer than water most of the time. As you sip, your gaze drifts toward the far wall where a small window peers out onto the night. The glass is cloudy, the leaded panes distorted, so the outside world looks as though it's swimming in a dream. Beyond it, you catch a flicker of torchlight and the hunched silhouette of a figure passing by. Out there, the night is cold, wet, and dangerous. But here, in the half-light of the tavern, there's a sense of fragile safety, the kind that makes you sink deeper into your seat and listen to the murmur of other lives passing close to yours. The tavern smells tell their own story. You catch layers of them now, the sweet, sharp tang of fermenting ale, the resinous smoke from the hearth, the salty fat of roasting pork, the sour musk of damp wool steaming dry on patrons' backs. It's not unpleasant if you let it settle in your nose. It's the smell of the medieval evening in miniature. Somewhere behind you, a door swings open, and the night breathes in again. A new arrival stamps his feet, shedding rainwater in a quick spray. He carries a small sack and glances around, eyes adjusting to the gloom. The tavern absorbs him like a drop of ink in water. Soon he's seated, shoulders hunched, mug in hand, and the door swings shut once more. This is not the place of roaring laughter and endless music you might have imagined from painted ensigns or storybook illustrations. It's quieter, older, and far more worn. It's a space where people come not to chase joy, but to survive the long evening together. And as you sit there, the hum of the room weaving around you like a shawl, you begin to understand why the medieval tavern endures in memory. It is, for all its grime and danger, a place where the world feels just a little bit smaller, and the night a little less lonely. You let your hand rest on the rough tabletop a moment longer, feeling the grooves left by years of impatient fingers drumming while waiting for drinks, or by knife tips idly carving initials that no one now remembers. The faint thud of your cup against the wood feels like joining a centuries-old conversation, unspoken but constant. The warmth from the hearth reaches you even here, curling against your shins, though your back still senses the cool breath of the wall. A low doorway catches your eye at the far end of the room. It's half hidden behind a dangling curtain made from something too thick to be called cloth and too frayed to be called leather. It sways gently in the draft, and you realize it must lead somewhere deeper into the tavern, the kind of place most patrons never notice unless they're looking. You rise slowly, feeling the stiffness of the bench release you. The floorboards groan under your step, a complaint pitched just low enough that no one else reacts. As you approach the smells shift, a note of raw onion cuts through the smoke along with the sharper tang of vinegar and something faintly metallic. You push the curtain aside and step through. The back room is narrower, dimmer. A single candle stub pools light on a small table pushed against the wall, illuminating a heap of wax drippings that testify to nights upon nights of this same vigil. Here the noise of the common room drops to a muffled murmur. You hear the crackle of firewood again, but it's more distant now, its warmth replaced by the still, cool air that clings to stone. To your right, an open arch leads into the kitchen. If the tavern's front is its heart, then this space is its lungs breathing in supplies, breathing out meals. The ceiling here is lower still, and you have to duck slightly as you step inside. The hearth is smaller, but burns hotter, its flames licking at the sides of two iron pots. One steams heavily, its surface dimpling, as something below releases bursts of vapor. The other simmers thick and slow, with occasional globs rising to the surface before melting back in. Against the far wall, a wooden table bears the remains of a recent chopping onion skins, curled like parchment leek tops wilting in a heap, a small scatter of flour dusting the boards. Beside it rests a cleaver, its blade notched but still keen, and a smaller knife with a bone handle polished by years of use. A basket of bread loaves sits nearby, the crusts cracked and floured. They're hard to the touch, the kind meant for soaking in stew rather than eating plain. The woman tending the pots notices you, but doesn't pause her work. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow, her hands red from scrubbing, or the cold, maybe both. She moves with that practiced efficiency that comes from repetition, one hand stirring the other, reaching for the next task before the first is done. Occasionally she glances toward a smaller doorway, at the back through which you hear faint clinks and scuffs. Curious, you edge toward it, ducking again. This smaller room is lined with barrels and sacks stacked along the walls. The barrels bear blackened marks, some letters, some symbols that tell the tavern keeper what's inside. You see rye flour, salted herring, smoked pork, perhaps even a cask or two of imported wine for the wealthier guests. The air here smells dry and dusty, with just a hint of the sea from the fish. A cat slips past your feet, tail high, its coat patterned in muddied patches. It vanishes between the barrels as though it belongs more to them than to the people who work here. Beyond the storeroom lies a back door. A single wooden latch keeps it shut, though gaps between the planks admit the cool night air. You lift the latch and step outside into a narrow yard hemmed in by high, uneven walls. It's darker here, the only light spilling from a shuttered lantern hung beside the door. The smell changes again, damp earth manure and the unmistakable tang of wet straw. A low structure leans against one wall, the tavern's stables. The stable is small, just enough to house a few traveling mounts, and perhaps a mule or two for hauling goods. The animals shift in their stalls, hooves thudding softly against the packed dirt. A single boy, younger even than the serving lad you saw earlier, is bedding one stall with fresh straw. He pauses to glance at you, then returns to his work without a word. You notice how quickly he moves, perhaps from habit, perhaps from the cold. Nearby, a pile of firewood sits under a patched awning, some logs already split and stacked neatly, others waiting in rough chunks. A small axe leans against the pile, its handle dark with use. Beside it, a row of empty buckets rests on their sides, still damp inside, likely just returned from the well. You realize how much work hums beneath the tavern's surface, invisible from the warmth of the front room, fetching water, chopping wood, tending animals, salting meat, grinding grain. All of it part of the endless cycle that keeps a place like this alive. You return through the storeroom and kitchen, passing the cook, who now hums softly to herself. In the back room, the candle stub has burned lower, its flame guttering. You pause there a moment, taking in how the air feels heavier in this part of the tavern, not unpleasant, but laden with the smells and heat of the work that sustains the whole building. From here, a narrow stair rises toward the upper floor. The steps are uneven, their centers worn into shallow hollows by countless feet. As you climb, your hand trails along the wall for balance. Its surface is cold and slightly gritty. Halfway up, you feel the tavern shift. The hum of the common room below grows fainter, replaced by a new quiet. At the top, a short hallway runs the length of the building, floored in creaking boards. Doors of different sizes line it irregularly, some no more than rough planks bound with iron straps, others with tiny iron latches instead of handles. Most are shut, but one stands ajar, revealing a sliver of candlelight. You peek inside. The room is sparse, a narrow bed of straw ticking, pushed against the wall, a rough stool and a small chest with a rope handle. On the bed lies a coarse wool blanket, its weave thick but scratchy. A single window lets in the pale shimmer of moonlight, but the glass is so flawed it scatters the light into ghostly streaks. This is the kind of room a traveler might take for the night, not comfortable by modern standards, but a precious shelter from wind, rain, and worse. Down the hall, a larger door stands open. Inside, several bedrolls are spread across the floor, each with a folded cloak or bundle of possessions at its head. This is the common sleeping room where travelers without coin for a private bed can pay a small fee for space on the floor. The air here is warmer, thicker, carrying the mingled scents of unwashed clothes, damp leather, and faintly sweet straw. You imagine the room at capacity on a stormy night, bodies lined shoulder to shoulder, the sound of rain on the roof, the wheeze of breath, and the occasional creak of someone shifting in their sleep. In such closeness, privacy is an illusion, but safety in numbers feels tangible. A ladder at the far end of the hall climbs to a loft. You ascend carefully. The wood flexes slightly under your weight. The loft is low and open to the rafters, a place for storage more than living. Bundles of herbs hang drying from the beams, thyme, rosemary, sage. Their fragrance wraps around you, masking the dust and lending the air a green, almost medicinal freshness. You crouch there among the herbs and bundles, listening. From up here, the tavern sounds different, a soft blend of kitchen clatter, the drone of voices, and the rhythmic thump of someone splitting wood outside. It's like hearing the tavern's heartbeat from the inside, steady, persistent, enduring. You linger in the loft a little longer, breathing in the faintly sweet perfume of drying herbs. It's a rare freshness in a place where most scents are stubborn, earthy, and cling to your clothes for days. From up here, you can almost pretend you're unseen, a quiet witness to the life below. But the murmur of voices drifts upward like smoke, pulling you back toward the source. The tavern calls, and you know the real heart of the night beats downstairs. You descend the ladder carefully, feeling the smooth wear of each rung under your palms. The hallway greets you again, with its uneven boards and low lamplight. The common room is louder now than when you left it. A few more tables have filled, and the hum of conversation has deepened into a tapestry of overlapping voices. You push through the curtain, and the warmth of the hearth wraps around you once more. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. The fire has burned lower, but its glow is richer, painting faces in tones of amber and gold. You notice the faces first, because each is a fragment of the world outside. There's the drover in a rough tunic, his forearms freckled with the dust of the road. The two merchants in worn but carefully mended coats bent over a game of tables. The young woman with a long plait down her back, cradling a mug with both hands, as though the heat might seep into her bones. Their clothes speak before they do. The poorest wear wool in its raw, scratchy state, undyed the color of oatmeal or earth. Better-off patrons sport tunics dyed in muted greens, blues, or russet shades affordable to those with some coin, but far from the costly brilliance of the nobility. Cloaks hang from chairbacks or lie bundled on benches, most edged with the darker stains of weather rainwater, road dust, maybe the faint mark of a cart axle or a stall post. A man at the farthest table wears a leather jerkin scarred with knife marks, his hair tied back with a strip of cloth. He sits alone, his mug untouched, eyes scanning the room with a hunter's patience. You notice how others give him space without thinking. Whether he's a mercenary between jobs or simply a man best left alone, the tavern seems to know. The serving boy darts between tables barefoot, weaving through the press of legs and benches without a misstep. His hands are quick, sometimes setting down mugs without breaking stride. When he returns to the bar, the tavern keeper barely looks up. She pours with one hand, gestures with the other, and the boy vanishes again into the crowd. This rhythm is its own kind of dance, one the regulars don't see, because it's as much a part of the tavern as the beams above their heads. In a shadowed corner, two older men lean close over a shared candle. One draws lines on the table with a bit of charcoal, speaking in low bursts. The other nods and occasionally jabs a finger toward some point only they can see. You wonder if they're mapping a trade route or planning something less lawful. The candle throws their faces into sharp relief, one narrow fox like the other round and soft like an old baker's loaf. At another table, a group of younger men, perhaps apprentices or laborers, play a loud game of dice. Their laughter comes in bursts, punctuated by groans or shouts of triumph. Coins clink softly on the wood, small sums to you, but likely the difference between a warm bed and a cold stable for them. Each throw of the dice seems to decide the rest of their night. The musician you noticed earlier has moved closer to the hearth. He plays not for applause, but for the way the notes keep the air from settling too still. His fingers dance over the strings of the lute, coaxing out a melody both bright and mournful. Now and then someone hums along. Now and then a patron tosses a copper onto the rug at his feet without breaking conversation. You notice unspoken rules at play. No one sits at a table without a nod or a word to those already there. No one drinks from another's mug. The bar is approached one at a time, and the space near the hearth belongs almost invisibly to the oldest regulars. These rules aren't written, but break them, and you'll feel the shift in the room before you hear it in words. The air is thicker now. Candle wax drips slower in the warmth, and the scent of the hearth has deepened meat roasting on a spit. Somewhere behind it, herbs thrown into the pot to coax the flavors forward. Ale breath mingles with the sharper tang of cider, with a faint yeasty sweetness from bread just pulled from the oven. And under it all, the slow mineral coolness of the stone floor lingers. You take a seat again, this time closer to the hearth, where the heat is strongest. From here, the tavern feels like a living body, the creak of beams, its bones shifting, the clatter of mugs, its pulse, the low murmur of voices, its breath. It's easy to forget the night outside, the cold, the wet, the narrow streets echoing with their own dangers. In here, time has thinned. The hour is marked not by clocks, but by the steady emptying of mugs and the slow burn of firewood. A door behind the bar opens briefly, and a man steps in carrying a small keg on his shoulder. His boots are thick with mud. His cheeks shine with cold. The tavern keeper greets him with a nod, and he disappears into the back without a word. Supplies arriving. The invisible lifeline between tavern and town. You watch the crowd's movements. People ebb and flow, some arriving drenched from the street, others slipping away quietly. Greetings are brief but heartfelt, and farewells even shorter. A clasp of hands, a murmured word, a tug at a cloak. The tavern doesn't hold anyone against their will, but neither does it send them away unwarmed. A burst of laughter draws your attention to the dice players again. One of them has rolled something impressive. His friends pound the table and coins change hands amid good-natured groans. You catch the gleam in their eyes, the kind that comes from forgetting the day's labor for just a little while. Somewhere behind you, the musician begins a new tune, lighter now, something that lifts the shoulders and tilts the head. A few patrons tap their feet unconsciously. The rhythm catches you too, though you resist swaying. This is music meant to be part of the air, not to demand attention. The tavern keeper's voice rises briefly as she calls for an order to be collected. Her tone is firm, neither sharp nor indulgent. The boy hurries to obey, and within moments the room folds back into its hum. You can tell she knows every face here knows who will linger too long without buying another mug, who will tip well, who will need walking out if the ale takes too firm a hold. For a moment you think about how this place might look when empty, the benches, cold, the hearth black, the air still. But you can't quite imagine it. The tavern seems inseparable from its people. Without them, it would be a shell, not a refuge. And tonight, it is very much alive. From your place near the hearth, you notice how the crowd sorts itself without anyone directing it. Us locals, those who can navigate the tavern with their eyes closed, gravitate to their usual corners, leaning into conversations that could have started years ago and never quite ended. Strangers, meanwhile, stand at the edges for a moment, eyes scanning for permission before daring to claim a seat. It's a quiet ritual, a nod here, a wave there, the smallest of gestures opening a space. A man in a thick wool cloak approaches the dice players. His cloak is pinned at the shoulder with a crude iron brooch, and his boots are caked in the kind of mud that comes from long roads rather than garden paths. He waits, hands tucked into his sleeves, until one of the younger men gestures toward a stool. A spot is made for him, and the dice game shifts just enough to welcome a new rhythm into its circle. No words of introduction, just the clink of a cup placed before him. Elsewhere, two women sit side by side on a bench against the wall, their heads close. One wears the simple head covering of a baker's wife, the other a short wool cape that looks expensive for this part of town. They share a plate of cheese and dark bread, their voices low but quick, like people who have little time and much to say. Every so often one glances toward the bar, as if checking for someone's arrival. At the largest table, a group of merchants occupies pride of place. Their coats are patched but clean, their belts heavy with pouches. The table before them is strewn with wax tablets and styluses, along with 2 or 3 rolled parchments weighted down by mugs. They speak in the practiced rhythm of bargaining numbers, murmured pauses, calculated replies delivered without haste. To an untrained ear, it's just conversation, but you hear the care in each word. This is not tavern chatter. This is business conducted under the camouflage of ale and firelight. A serving boy sets down another round, and one of the merchants slips him a small coin. It's not payment for the drink that's already covered, but the sort of tip that buys silence. The boy nods once, tucks it into his sleeve, and vanishes. The whole exchange takes less than a breath. Across the room, the musician plays a slower tune now. His lute picks out a pattern that matches the murmur of the tavern, steady flowing, unhurried. In one corner, a trio of travelers sits shoulder to shoulder. Their cloaks are travel-stained, the hems stiff with dried mud. Each keeps a hand near a pack or pouch, eyes flicking now and then toward the door. They look like people who have seen enough nights on the road to distrust the safety of four walls, no matter how warm. The tavern keeper moves between the tables, her eyes missing nothing. She stops to greet a man just in from the street, a heavy-set fellow carrying a narrow bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. They exchange a few words too low to hear, and she gestures him toward the merchant's table. Whatever is in that bundle, it isn't bread. You lean back, letting your gaze roam over the shifting currents of the room. It's like watching a tide, the way people gather, split, and reform in new combinations. Some meetings are brief, a passing of information, a quick check-in, a shared drink before parting ways. Others are longer, the kind that knot the air around them and draw in anyone near enough to overhear. You catch one such knot at the next table. A man with a scar across his jaw is speaking to a younger man in a green tunic. His voice is low, but the green tunic lad leans forward intently, nodding often. Now and then the older man pauses to scratch a crude diagram on the table with his fingernail, then wipes it away with his sleeve. Whatever he's describing is not for ink and parchment. Meanwhile, in the opposite corner, the older men who were mapping something in charcoal are still at it. Their candle burns lower now, the wax pooling toward the table's center. They argue quietly, one tapping the map with a sharp motion, while the other shakes his head. The air between them has the tautness of a net stretched too tight. The fire shifts a log, collapsing inward with a hiss. Sparks whirl upward into the chimney. The heat pulses outward in a soft wave, loosening the shoulders of those nearest. The air is thick enough now that each breath feels steeped in the scents of wood smoke, warm ale, and roasting meat. Somewhere behind the bar, a ladle scrapes against the side of a pot, the sound as steady as a heartbeat. A door near the back opens briefly to admit a pair of townsmen. Their boots track in a fan of wet mud, and their cloaks are wet enough to drip. They shake themselves like dogs before unpinning their cloaks and slinging them over the backs of chairs. One of them calls for cider, his voice carrying easily over the murmur. Within minutes, they're folded into the life of the room, already laughing with the dice players, already waving at the musician to play something livelier. You notice how easily strangers dissolve into the fabric here. A seat, a drink, and the willingness to nod at the right people, that's all it takes. But equally, you sense how quickly someone could find themselves unwelcome. The wrong word, the wrong move, and the air would change. Not violently, perhaps, but in that subtle way where faces turn away and chairs shift to close you out. The merchants at their table are leaning closer now. One unfurls a scrap of parchment covered in tight writing. Another pulls from his pouch a small leather bag and tips out a clink of coins, silver by the sound. The man with the oiled cloth bundle watches closely, but does not touch. His hands rest on the table, palms down, as though to keep them from acting too soon. The tavern keeper drifts by, her expression unreadable. She doesn't linger. Perhaps she knows exactly what's being discussed and doesn't need to hear the words. Or perhaps she prefers not to. In a place like this, the line between host and witness is thin. From somewhere near the hearth, a soft voice begins to sing. It's not the musician he still plays, head bowed over his lute, but a woman seated among the locals. Her song is unaccompanied, the melody winding upward like smoke. It's a ballad, you think, though the words are old enough to blur in your ears. The room doesn't fall silent, but the sound seems to weave through the conversations like a thread binding them for a moment. When she finishes, there's no applause, only a murmur of appreciation and the passing of another mug her way. She smiles faintly, lowers her head, and the room exhales again into its usual murmur. Your own mug is nearly empty. The last sip has gone warm, its bitterness softened by the heat of the fire. You place it on the table, the sound lost in the general clatter. In this moment, you see the tavern clearly, not just a place for drink and warmth, but an unmarked ledger where connections are made, deals are struck, and the fragile web of town life is quietly rewoven every night. Strangers pass through, locals return, and the boundaries between them blur just enough to keep the whole from fraying. And as the night deepens, you feel that you've slipped into a current that has carried countless others before you. The timeless tide of people seeking shelter, company, and perhaps a little luck before the morning comes. The hours here don't announce themselves with clocks. They creep in quietly, slipping between the notes of the lute and the rise and fall of voices. You notice it first in the way the heat from the fire feels heavier now, curling closer around you, as though it too has settled in for the night. The candles have burned lower, their pools of wax wider, their flames bending at the faintest breath of a draft. The merchants have rolled up their parchments. Their coin has been counted, recounted, and tucked away. Their words are fewer now, their glances slower, but you sense they've done what they came to do. One by one they rise, offer short farewells, and melt into the darkness outside. No one follows them with their eyes for long. In a tavern, business is its own shadow. At the dice table, the stakes have shrunk to a few coins and scraps of bread. The laughter comes in smaller bursts, now tinged with the slur of drink. One man leans back too far on his stool, nearly toppling before he catches himself with a startled shout that brings a few amused looks and a half-hearted cheer. The newcomer with the iron-pinned cloak still plays, though his throws are lazier now, his cup circling the table slower before spilling its little clatter of fate. The musician sets his lute aside, rubbing his fingers and flexing them in the firelight. A small bowl at his feet holds a handful of coppers and the occasional bit of food wrapped in cloth, payment enough to see him through to the next warm room. He stretches, takes a long drink, and begins quietly tuning again, each note sliding into the next, like the tavern slipping deeper into night. The two women on the bench have finished their bread and cheese. Their heads lean closer still, and now the conversation is slower, punctuated by small sighs. One gestures faintly toward the door, and they both stand adjusting their cloaks and hoods. Before they leave, they pause at the bar to exchange a few words with the tavern keeper. Whatever is said draws a short laugh from her, and the women disappear into the cold. In the common room, gaps begin to appear. A stool left vacant here, a table down to a single occupant there. The locals who remain are the ones most reluctant to face the night. Those who know their beds are colder than the air near the hearth, or whose homes hold no company but shadows. They linger over mugs gone nearly empty, drawing out the last drops, as if they could stretch the hours too. The tavern keeper starts her quiet rounds. She gathers stray cups, stacks trenchers scraped nearly clean, and refills the hearth with a few careful lows. Each addition to the fire draws a soft rush of heat, the sound of sap sizzling in the fresh wood. The serving boy moves slower now, less darting, more drifting, but still alert to every nod or lifted hand. At a table near yours, the scar-jawed man from earlier has shifted his chair so his back rests against the wall. His eyes have that softened, distant focus of someone no longer in conversation, but not yet ready to rise. He's half listening to the younger man in the green tunic, whose words spill out more freely now, carried by ale and the safety of a late-hour hush. The ballad singer from earlier hums under her breath as she folds her shawl tighter. Her song is just for herself this time, a tune without an audience. She sips her drink slowly, her gaze on the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. Every so often the door opens to let out another guest. The night outside breathes in, carrying with it the smell of rain on stone, the metallic tang of the damp street. Each time it closes, the tavern exhales, pulling its warmth back tight. You hear more laughter now, but it's different from earlier, softer, looping back on itself without the sharp edge of games or wagers. People lean closer, elbows on tables, voices dropping to near whispers, as if the hour itself demands it. Even the dice players have stopped mid-game. One of them absently rolling a single die back and forth between his fingers while he listens to a story he's heard a dozen times before. A man you hadn't noticed earlier rises from a corner seat and makes his way to the hearth. His steps are careful, his face lined with years. He stands there for a moment, letting the heat touch him, then turns to face the room. Without a word, he begins to speak. His voice is low and even, carrying easily in the softened air. You can't catch every word, some are lost to the creak of the building and the slow sigh of the fire, but the tone is unmistakable. It's a story one he's told before, perhaps many times. The others don't interrupt. They listen, heads tilted, eyes on the flames, as though the story and the fire are one. The tale meanders. It's about a journey, a river, a bargain, struck in the shadow of a ruined bridge. It winds on without hurry, circling back now and then, the way late-night stories do. The merchant might have left the deals, might be done, but here in this hour the tavern trades only in words. When he finishes, there's no cheer, no applause, just the shifting of feet, the soft scrape of mugs on wood. Someone clears their throat, and the room breathes again. The musician plucks a few gentle notes, not a song so much as a sound, to hold the air together. You find yourself watching the tavern keeper now. She leans briefly against the bar, hands resting flat on the plank. Her eyes move from table to table, counting the mugs left to clear, noting who's still steady on their feet and who might need a word before leaving. Her work is nearly done for the night, but it's a work that never truly ends. The fire has burned lower again, though it still throws enough heat to keep the room comfortable. Shadows lengthen on the beams overhead, moving slowly with the sway of candle flames. Somewhere in the back you hear the scrape of a chair, the muffled thump of boots climbing the narrow stairs to the sleeping rooms. The tavern's life is folding inward now, the edges softening. You sip what's left in your mug, the last of it flat and warm, but welcome all the same. Around you, conversations trail off into companionable silences. A few heads nod forward briefly before jerking upright again, caught between wanting to stay and needing to go. The tavern isn't empty yet, but it's heading that way. You can feel it in the slower pace of footsteps, in the way no one starts anything new now, no games, no fresh bargains, no new songs. The night has turned its corner, and the room is gliding toward its rest. The night outside presses harder at the shutters, now testing the cracks for a way in. Inside, the air has thickened into something close and still, the heat of so many bodies lingering, even as their numbers dwindle. The tavern's voice has dropped to a murmur, not the hush of secrecy, but the gentle slackening of a room that's had its fill of itself. One of the dice players rises slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. He clasps another on the back, exchanges a few low words, and slips out through the door. The iron-pinned cloak traveler soon follows, pulling his hood up before the night can greet his face. Each departure feels like a thread loosening from a woven cloth. At the long table near the wall, only the scar-jawed man and his green tunic companion remain. Their conversation has become halting, the green tunic lad's words stretched by long pauses. Eventually, they too stand, scrape their stools back, and nod toward the bar. The tavern keeper acknowledges them with a faint lift of her chin, and they vanish into the cold. The ballad singer lingers longer, sipping from her mug until it's empty. She wraps her shawl tight around her shoulders, sets the mug neatly before her, and offers the tavern keeper a small smile. No words, just a look of mutual recognition that this was a night worth having. She slips into the darkness like a shadow returning to its place. By now, the common room feels spacious, the empty benches and open floorboards changing the shape of the space. The hearth is no longer a center of gravity. It's simply the brightest thing in the room, still holding on, still burning. The flames have shrunk to fit the hour, their light trembling against the blackened stones. The musician packs away his lute, wrapping it carefully in a cloth. He stoops to collect the coins from his bowl, counting them with quick, practiced fingers. A nod to the tavern keeper, a murmured farewell to the serving boy, and he too is gone. The door closes behind him with a final sounding thud. You're one of only a handful left now. A man at the far side of the room leans on his elbows, staring into his mug, as though waiting for something to rise from it. Another sits with his back to the wall, cloak draped around him, eyes half shut. He might be sleeping, but in a tavern this late, no one checks unless he starts to snore. The tavern keeper begins her quiet sweep of the room. She gathers cups, stacks them on a tray, balanced easily in one hand, and tucks stray trenchers under her arm. Now and then she pauses to straighten a stool or nudge a bench back into place. She moves like someone who has done this so many times, she could walk the room blindfolded. The serving boy is slower now, his earlier quickness traded for the heavy steps of the end of a long day. He ferries a bucket to the kitchen, the faint splash of water audible even over the fire's soft crackle. When he returns, his bare feet are damp, leaving faint prints on the boards before they vanish in the room's warmth. A few more patrons leave, each greeted by a nod from behind the bar. No one lingers at the door, now it's simply a step into the night, and then the dark swallows them whole. Soon only you and the man in the corner remain. The tavern keeper steps over to him, speaking in a voice low but firm. He straightens, nods once, and pulls his cloak around him. The exchange is short, without fuss. Moments later, the door swings shut behind him, and you are alone with the keeper and her boy. The room exhales for the last time tonight. The quiet now is different, not the hum of voices fading, but the gentle sigh of a building left to itself. You hear the soft tick of cooling wood in the hearth, the faint groan of the beams settling overhead. The tavern keeper moves to the door and drops a thick wooden bar across it, securing it with a satisfying clunk. The street outside is no longer part of this world. The night belongs to it alone. Now comes the closing ritual. She douses the wall candles first, pinching each flame between calloused fingers. Their thin smoke curls upward, joining the darker shadows high in the rafters. The hearth is left for last. She takes the iron poker and shifts the logs, letting the smaller pieces collapse into the bed of coals. Then, with a deliberate hand, she lays a new log across them, not to burn brightly now, but to smolder through the night, ensuring embers still glow come morning. The serving boy collects the last mugs and retreats to the kitchen. You hear the faint clink of pottery, the rush of water, the muffled scrape of wood against wood. The smells of the day still hang in the air: ale smoke, roasted meat, damp wool. Soon the sharper edges will fade, leaving only the soft scent of cooled ash and dry timber. The tavern keeper crosses to the bar and begins stacking coins from the night's trade into neat piles. She counts in silence, the only sound the faint chink of silver and copper. Now and then she pauses, fingers resting lightly on a stack as though fixing the number in her mind. You realize this is her quietest hour, the moment when the work is done, but the tavern is still hers, unshared with anyone else. There's a certain ownership in the way she glances around the empty room, her gaze lingering on each table as if recalling the faces that filled it tonight. The serving boy returns, drying his hands on his tunic. He yawns wide, unbothered by manners now. The keeper sends him upstairs with a flick of her head. He obeys without protest, his small feet thudding on the steps, until they vanish into the upper dark. She takes one last slow walk through the room, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the hearth, the latch of the bar door. It's not inspection so much as reassurance, a wordless confirmation that the tavern will hold steady through the night. Finally, she retreats toward the kitchen, taking the tray of cups with her. The fire's light follows her as far as the doorway, then stops, leaving the common room in the softer glow of the embers. You sit there a moment longer, hearing the building settle into its rest. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaks, the boy finding his bed, perhaps. Outside, the wind stirs faintly against the shutters. The smell of wood smoke is thicker now, with no fresh air to cut it. This is the tavern's truest quiet, the one no guest usually hears. The moment when the life of the night has been tucked away, when the walls hold only the memory of voices, and the fire remembers every hand that warmed itself here. The tavern holds its breath. The fire's glow is the only movement in the room, now a slow-breathing pulse that rises and falls against the blackened hearthstones. Shadows cling thick in the rafters. The air is warm still, but it's the kind of warmth that lingers out of habit, not from the effort of fresh logs. You feel it against your face like the last exhale before sleep. The wood creaks above you. It's not the hurried tread of the serving boy, nor the deliberate step of the tavern keeper. These are softer, more random sounds, the shifting weight of the building itself as it relaxes into the night. Old timbers do that. They hold the day in their bones and then slowly release it in sighs and groans, once darkness has claimed the hours. Somewhere beyond the thick door, the town moves in its own quiet rhythms. The night watchman passes his lantern, throwing a faint flicker of gold across the shutter slats. His steps crunch on the damp street, measured and unhurried, the iron tip of his staff tapping in time. He pauses near the tavern, perhaps to listen, perhaps to check that the shutters are latched, then moves on, swallowed again by the muffled distance. In the stable yard out back, the animals shift. A hoof scrapes the dirt floor, the sound small but clear in the stillness. One of the horses blows softly through its nostrils, stamping once before settling again. Somewhere above them in the loft, the cat makes its rounds, paws soundless as it slips between rafters. A faint rustle tells you it's found something worth chasing. Inside, the tavern's scent changes with the cooling air. The sharper notes of ale and roasting meat fade first, replaced by the deeper earth smoke of the hearth and the sweet, dry tang of old wood. It's a smell that belongs only to empty taverns, the ghost of the day after it's gone to ground. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Even the silence has a texture here. You can hear the faint tick of cooling metal in the kitchen, the whisper of straw shifting upstairs as someone turns in their bed, the long, steady breath of the fire's last coals. Every sound stands alone now, unlayered by voices or footsteps. But the night is never empty. Outside, the world holds its own hazards. Somewhere in the alleys, a dog barks, once sharp, insistent, then again farther off. It's answered by another, their call and reply stretching over the sleeping roofs. A sudden rush of feet splashes through a puddle, quick, purposeful, gone in seconds. Whoever it is doesn't stop to glance at the tavern door. Not all passers-by in the medieval night are harmless. There are cut purses and drunks, petty thieves, and the desperate poor who watch for an unlatched shutter or a forgotten sack in a doorway. But the tavern is barred and bolted. Its very walls seem to stand straighter in defiance of intrusion. The tavern keeper stirs once in the back. You hear the faint scrape of a chair and the creak of a door hinge, then nothing more. Perhaps she's making her own round, checking the locks, ensuring the back door is secured. Perhaps she's simply listening as you are for the oddities that creep in with night. From the sleeping quarters above, a muffled cough breaks the stillness. Someone shifts boots, scraping briefly against a floorboard. Then silence again. The boy's smaller steps cross from one side of the room to the other, the boards groaning faintly under his weight. He pauses, then returns. You imagine him peering out a tiny loft window, curious about the quiet streets below. An hour passes, or perhaps only minutes. Time drips slowly here like wax from a forgotten candle. The fire shrinks further, its edges crumbling into soft gray. Now and then a coal pops, sending a brief spurt of red light skittering across the hearthstones before it dies. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls not for alarm but for the hour. The sound comes faint through the thickness of walls and the long damp air outside. You count the notes 1, 2, 3 until they fade into the night. The town sleeps deeper now, its breath slow and even. In that deep stillness, the tavern feels like a ship at anchor tied fast to the night, gently rocking on its own currents. The smell of the drying herbs upstairs drifts faintly down the stairwell, mingling with the cooler breath of the banked fire. You draw your cloak closer without thinking. Beyond the shutters, the first pale strokes of moonlight begin to soften the street. Clouds slide past, sometimes thickening the dark, sometimes letting the silver spill freely. In that unsteady light, the tavern's shadow lengthens and retreats, as if breathing in time with the night itself. The cat appears again, padding across the floor from the back room. It pauses at the hearth, stares into the coals for a moment, then curls itself into a tight ball near the warmest patch. Its tail wraps neatly over its nose. Soon, its slow, deep breaths join the rhythm of the room. You might have drifted into sleep yourself if not for a faint change in the air. It's nothing dramatic, just a whisper of movement, a sense that the night is loosening its hold. Perhaps it's the faintest shift in the smell, the cold outside growing less sharp. Or perhaps it's the subtle rise in the pitch of the silence as if the world is beginning to stir beneath it. The bell tolls again, faint, measured, patient. The hours are stacking toward morning now. A pale seam of light presses at the eastern shutters, tentative but insistent. The moon's glow fades just enough to admit this other brightness. In the stable yard, a rooster tries its voice. It's a ragged, uncertain call, as though even it doubts the wisdom of waking so soon. But the sound carries echoing softly against the walls. A moment later, one of the horses shifts heavily in its stall. The cat raises its head, blinks, and resettles. Upstairs, a board creaks sharply, the boy again, perhaps, or an early rising guest. You hear the muted thud of boots pulled on the rustle of cloth. A hinge protests softly as a door opens, then closes. The tavern isn't awake yet, not fully, but the deep night is over. Outside, the darkness has thinned. The edges of the street stand out against the pale-leaning sky. Somewhere far off, a cartwheel grinds against stone, its rhythm slow but steady, moving toward the market square. In the hearth, the coals glow stubbornly, as if unwilling to surrender their place. You watch one crumble at last, collapsing into a fine drift of ash that the faintest draft stirs into the air. The tavern's first sigh of morning is not in voices, but in these small stirrings, the distant cart, the creak upstairs, the softened air. You know that soon the quiet will give way to the shuffle of feet, the scrape of benches, the new day's fire being coaxed into life. But for now, it's still yours, the tavern in that fragile breath between night and morning. The pale seam of morning light that had been pressing at the shutters now stretches wider, spilling a faint silver across the floor. It catches on the edges of the empty mugs left on the bar, glints faintly on the iron poker by the hearth, and glimmers on the curled edge of a wax puddle on the nearest table. The darkness hasn't entirely let go, but its grip has softened enough to let the day start to slip in. From the back room comes the muffled clatter of pottery, the kitchen stirring to life. You hear the scrape of a stool, then the slow tread of the tavern keeper as she emerges from the shadows. Her hair is loosely braided now, her sleeves rolled high. She moves without hesitation toward the hearth, the work of morning already in her hands, before she's even fully awake. She crouches low, inspecting the banked fire. Her fingers find the poker and prod the coals, sending up a faint hiss as ash shifts and settles. She leans close, breathes into the embers, and coaxes them into a soft red glow. A few thin sticks are laid across them, then a thicker piece of split oak. The first tongue of flame curls upward, eager for the fuel, and within moments the hearth is awake again. The serving boy stumbles in from the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He carries a small pail of water, setting it down with a thud near the fire. His bare feet pad over the boards as he begins to clear away the mugs and trenchers that the night left behind. Every so often he pauses to yawn wide and unbothered before resuming his work. The tavern keeper moves behind the bar, uncorking a jug and pouring a measure into a small pot, hanging just above the flames. The scent of ale warming with herbs soon drifts into the air, soft and sharp at once. She adds a pinch of something from a small cloth bundle, stirring with the slow rhythm of someone who has done this every morning for years. Outside, the early street sounds begin to grow. The cart you heard earlier rattles past the tavern, now its wooden wheels groaning against the stones. Somewhere a door slams, not in anger, but in the way of someone starting their day with energy. The first calls of the market stall keepers float faintly in voices muffled by the walls, but clear in their intent. In the stable yard, the boy's older brother, or perhaps just another hand who works here, has started tending to the animals. You hear the dull thump of a stall door opening, the soft snort of a horse as it's led out into the yard. The smell of fresh hay drifts briefly in as the tavern door to the yard is opened and shut again. The cat is still curled near the hearth, but its ears twitch at every sound. It stretches luxuriously, arches its back, and moves to the doorway as though it owns the morning. The tavern keeper steps aside to let it out without breaking her work. By now, the room's shadows are retreating fast. The daylight seeps in through the small, wavy glass windows, pale at first, but brightening with each breath. Dust motes begin to turn lazily in the beams of light, their slow drift the only truly idle thing in the tavern. The boy returns from the kitchen with a broom sweeping briskly under the tables. Bits of straw, crumbs of bread, and the odd coin left behind in the night's business are gathered into a neat pile. He pockets the coin, quick, furtive, but with a glance at the keeper, who pretends not to notice. The hearth now burns strong enough to throw heat into the room. A fresh iron pot is hung over it, this one filled with water and a few root vegetables. The scent is clean, earthy, a promise of broth later in the day. On a nearby hook, a bundle of dried herbs sways slightly in the heat, releasing a faint green fragrance that threads itself into the air. A knock sounds at the door. The keeper doesn't rush. She knows who it is. The wooden bar is lifted with a low groan, the door opened just enough to admit a man carrying a small sack. He exchanges a few quiet words with her, places the sack on the nearest table, and takes his leave without stepping further inside. When she unties the cord, the smell of fresh bread rises into the room, dense, dark loaves still warm from the oven. The first guest of the day appears not long after. He's a stocky man in a short wool cloak, his cheeks raw from the cold. He stamps the street dust from his boots at the door and steps inside with the briskness of someone who knows exactly what he's come for. A nod to the keeper, a muttered greeting, and he takes a seat near the hearth. The boy brings him a mug before he even asks. A second arrival follows, soon a woman with a basket hooked over her arm, her skirt hem damp from the street. She sets the basket carefully on the bench beside her, glancing around, as though she might spot someone she knows. When her eyes land on the bread sack on the table, she smiles faintly, perhaps guessing where today's loaves came from. These early customers don't linger over drink the way nighttime patrons do. They sip slowly, watch the street through the warped window glass, and speak little. They are here for warmth before their day takes them back out into the cold. The tavern keeper's movements now have a different rhythm than at night. There is no urgency, no weaving through a crowd, only the steady sequence of morning tasks. She wipes the tables clean, checks the mugs for chips, and refills the candle sconces, though they won't be lit until the sun slips again. The boy ferries buckets to and from the back, each trip a quick patter of feet that marks the pace of the morning. In the stable yard, the sounds grow livelier, a bridle's soft jingle, a horse's impatient snort, the scrape of a shovel clearing the stalls. Soon, the faint rhythmic chop of an axe joins the chorus, each swing followed by the crack of splitting wood. Through the windows, you see the street changing too. More people pass now, a woman leading a goat, a man carrying a bundle of kindling, two children running with some urgent game of their own. A church bell tolls faintly in the distance, its note caught and softened by the morning air. The tavern is still quiet, but it's no longer the hushed quiet of night. This is the stillness of a space readying itself, the steady gathering of heat smells and order, before the day's guests claim it again. The tables are bare, the benches empty, but you can feel the invisible threads of the day beginning to weave themselves in. In the kitchen, the clatter grows louder, knives on wood, the rattle of a pan, the faint hiss as something hits the heat. The smells begin to change, onions sharp in the air, bread warming on the hearth ledge, the faint bite of fresh-cut herbs crushed under a pestle. You take one last look around the quiet common room before it fills again. The fire holds its bright heart, the bread waits on the table, the mugs are lined in their place on the bar. The tavern is breathing in, ready to exhale the day. The shift from morning quiet to day's hum is subtle at first. It begins with footsteps, a few scattered ones in the street outside, boots striking the cobblestones in unhurried rhythm. Then comes the faint creak of the tavern's door, as the first trickle of daytime customers makes its way in, shedding cloaks, loosening scarves, shaking off the damp. A pair of traders arrive together, their cloaks smelling of wood smoke and distant stables. One carries a rolled length of cloth under his arm, the other a small chest bound with leather straps. They choose a table near the wall, nod to the keeper, and begin untying the chest straps with fingers stiff from the cold. The boy appears almost instantly, sliding mugs onto the table as if by instinct. The traders don't speak much at first. They flex their hands, and let the fire's warmth loosen their joints before they bother with talk. Soon after, two men in leather aprons duck in. They are clearly workers, their faces wine-reddened, their hair smelling faintly of tallow and soot. They greet the keeper with familiarity, thump themselves onto a bench, and order something hot to eat. The kitchen answers with a hiss and a clatter, and in moments the smell of frying onions begins to mingle with the fire's breath. From the street, the voices of hawkers and buyers grow more distinct, seeping in with each opening of the tavern door. A cart passes close enough for you to hear the uneven rattle of its wheels, the driver's shout to a stubborn mule. Somewhere farther off, a hammer begins to ring against metal in slow, sure beats, the day's rhythm spreading through the town. The tavern now breathes in longer, deeper drafts of life. The keeper moves between the bar and the tables in calm, steady loops, her sleeves rolled high, her hair tucked neatly away. The boy darts in her wake, ferrying bread and mugs, clearing empty trenchers, and wiping the benches dry where melted frost has left damp patches. The traders at the wall begin their low exchange. They spread the cloth across the table, its bright woven patterns at odds with the dim timber walls. Coins appear counted in neat rows, then swept into a pouch. A scrap of parchment is produced, marked quickly, and rolled again. The chest is pushed closer to one man's feet, a deal concluded as quietly as it began. Two women enter together, one carrying a small bundle wrapped in wool. They choose a table near the hearth, placing the bundle carefully beside them before ordering bread and warmed ale. When the wool is peeled back, you catch sight of knitted caps and gloves, perhaps for sale to other patrons, perhaps part of their own work to keep idle hands busy through the cold months. A farmer, his boots caked in a layer of frozen mud, stops in only briefly. He accepts a mug from the boy, drinks it down in 3 long swallows, and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand before returning to the street. His visit lasts no more than 5 minutes, a warm pause before the rest of his day swallows him up. By mid-morning, the common room hums with steady, layered sound. The creak of benches as people shift, the soft slap of mugs meeting wood. Low laughter from a corner where 2 men swap stories in the half-boast, half-confession style of those who know each other well. And beneath it all, the fire's gentle crackle, the tavern's unending pulse. In the kitchen, work continues at a relentless pace. You hear the knife's quick percussion against the chopping board, the heavier thud of a cleaver striking bone. Pots are stirred, bread is cut into thick slabs, and the scent of stewing meat begins to dominate the air. It's a smell that creeps into every fold of cloth, a scent no one leaves without carrying. The boy passes by you, balancing a trencher laden with broth-soaked bread and steaming vegetables. The heat rolls off it in fragrant waves. He sets it before one of the leather-aproned men, who murmurs a word of thanks without breaking his conversation. Outside, the town's sounds grow brighter. The market is in full sway, now its calls and laughter carried on the cool air. The door swings more often each time, letting in a sharper gust that makes the fire flare and sends a ripple through the nearest candles. The tavern keeper keeps a quiet watch, her eyes scanning the room with the same awareness she holds at night, though the stakes are different now. By day, she looks for empty mugs, for a hand raised in signal for the subtle glance of someone seeking company. She sees the lone patron by the far wall, a scribe perhaps judging by the ink stains on his fingers, and sends the boy over with fresh bread before he even asks. Midday approaches, and with it comes the fuller crowd. Workers on short breaks drift in, shaking the chill from their coats and rubbing their hands together as they head for the hearth. A group of younger apprentices clusters near the door, their laughter loud but harmless, their talk spilling easily into the room. One table near you fills with a mix of strangers. At first they speak little, sipping in companionable silence, but soon they begin trading observations about the weather, the market, the state of the roads. The conversation picks up speed as common ground emerges. A cousin in the same village, a neighbor who once mended the same roof. The tavern is good at this, turning strangers into acquaintances over the rim of a mug. By now, the fire burns bright and high, its heat loosening more than just cold, stiffened fingers. People lean back in their chairs, voices growing rounder and more confident. The kitchen keeps pace, sending out trencher after trencher, each steaming plate vanishing almost as quickly as it's set down. The traders conclude their morning business and gather their belongings. The patterned cloth is rolled tight, the chest latched again. They exchange quick farewells with the keeper and step out into the brighter light beyond the door. Their seats are barely cold before they're claimed by a pair of craftsmen, their leather satchels set carefully on the bench beside them. Through the window, you catch sight of a group of children darting past, weaving between slower-moving townsfolk. Their shouts are high and bright, chasing one another into the maze of side streets. For a moment, Their energy seems to spill into the tavern itself, a small burst of movement and laughter that ripples outward before settling again. By the time the sun reaches its midday climb, the tavern has found its rhythm. The rush of arrivals has slowed, replaced by a steady in and out flow. The boy moves with practiced ease, the keeper keeps her watch. The fire holds its warm dominion. The air is full of voices of heat, of smells, that make the outside world feel a little farther away than it is. And you realize that just as the tavern has its late-night self, its morning self, it also has this, the daytime face it shows to the world. A place less shadowed, less guarded, but still holding the same quiet pulse beneath it all. A place that welcomes not only the weary traveler, but the working neighbor, the hurried trader, the familiar face seeking the same bench they sat at yesterday. The day tips past its crest without ceremony. The sun outside has shifted just enough to throw new angles of light through the small windows, changing the way the dust motes drift in their slow dance. The pale gold pools across tabletops bending and scattering through the ripples in the wavy glass. The earlier crowd has thinned. The apprentices have returned to their work, the market-bound traders have moved on to other stalls, and the street beyond the door carries a gentler hum. The tavern keeps a few of its day guests, those who have nowhere urgent to be, and no reason to leave a warm bench for the winter's chill. Two of the leather-aproned workers still sit near the hearth, their mugs half full, and their talk moving in slow, steady currents. Between them lies a shared trencher, the bread soggy from stew, but still worth pulling apart with calloused fingers. They speak less now, their words falling into the quiet, the way a stone drops into a still pond, not to stir it much, but enough to mark their presence. A woman with a spindle and a basket of wool has claimed a bench by the window. She works steadily, her fingers twisting and drawing the fibers into a fine thread that winds onto the spindle's shaft. The motion is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and the soft rasp of wool on wool becomes part of the tavern's low murmur. Now and then she glances toward the door, but no one she seeks has yet appeared. The scribe remains at his small table bent over a sheet of parchment. His pen scratches in a patient rhythm, pausing only for him to dip into the ink pot. Every so often he lifts his head, flexes his fingers, and blows gently across the ink to help it dry. He seems immune to the shifting noises around him, his attention anchored in whatever words he is shaping. In the kitchen, the pace has eased as well. The heavier chopping is done. Now you hear the quieter clink of ladles against the sides of pots, the soft shuffle of feet on the worn flagstones. The midday rush has left behind a comfortable hum, not idle but unhurried. The keeper moves between kitchen and common room at a measured pace, checking mugs, refilling bread baskets, and exchanging a few words with the lingering guests. The fire burns lower than at its midday peak, though it still gives off a steady warmth. A few more logs are stacked within reach, ready for the evening's build-up. The cat has reclaimed its favorite spot near the hearth, stretched long, now paused, twitching occasionally in whatever small dream it chases. From time to time, the door opens for a lone traveler or townsman. A man in a fur-lined cap steps in, shakes the cold from his cloak, and orders a mug before finding a seat near the wall. Later, a young boy bursts in with a scrap of parchment in hand, a message for someone only to vanish as quickly as he came once the note has changed hands. These brief intrusions stir the air, but the calm quickly settles again. The tavern in afternoon is a different creature from its morning and night selves. There's a looseness to it, a willingness to let the hours drift without rushing them toward any particular end. It becomes a shelter for the in-between moments of the day, too late for the hurry of morning, too early for the press of evening. Outside the street, sounds have a lazier rhythm. A merchant's voice calls faintly from the market square, but without the edge of urgency. The occasional rattle of a passing cart breaks the stillness, its wheels sounding duller now that the frost has melted a little on the stones. The smell of baking from a nearby shop drifts in on the cold air whenever the door is opened. Inside, the air is softer, holding on to the scents of bread herbs and wood smoke. It wraps around you the way a heavy cloak might, not suffocating, but gently insistent. You notice how the sounds carry differently now. Without the layered clamor of many voices, each small noise takes on its own clear note. The clink of a spoon against a mug. The quiet sigh of the woman by the window. The low cough of the scribe as he pauses in his work. The keeper takes a moment to sit at the bar, her hands resting on the plank before her. It's a brief pause, but a real one, the kind of break you take only when you know the room won't call for you every other breath. The boy takes over her small duties for a while, ferrying mugs and wiping down a table or two. He moves more slowly than in the rush hours, but still with the instinct of someone who knows the value of a task done before it's asked for. Now and then someone enters just to warm themselves before returning to their work outside. A man with a bundle of kindling stops long enough to hold his hands toward the fire, nodding to the workers at the hearth before stepping out again. Later, a woman with a basket of eggs rests her load on a bench, shares a few quick words with the keeper, and continues on her way. The tavern is not just a place to linger. It's a crossroads, a brief pause in the day's flow for those who pass through. In the quiet, you begin to notice the building itself again. The slow tick of the beams in the walls, the faint creak of a board settling under the weight of no one at all. The way the light shifts inch by inch as the sun moves outside, warming first one table, then another, before slipping higher and leaving them in shadow again. You take a slow sip from your mug, the ale cool but still pleasant. Around you, the air feels held in place by the steady presence of those who remain, the spindle woman, the scribe, the workers by the hearth. There's no rush here now, no expectation of movement. It's a rare stillness in a place that will soon inevitably be claimed again by the lively tide of evening. Somewhere beyond the door, the bell at the church tower marks the hour. The sound drifts in softly, each toll lingering a moment in the warm air before fading. The workers stir slightly, as if reminded of some duty waiting for them. One drains his mug, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and stands. The other follows a moment later, and they leave together their benches cold in their absence. The scribe finishes his work at last, capping his inkpot and rolling the parchment with care. He tucks it into his satchel, pays the keeper, and offers her a brief nod before disappearing into the brightening afternoon light. The spindle woman keeps her place, her work now piled neatly in her basket. For a short while, you have the sense that the tavern is holding its breath again, not in anticipation, but in contentment. The fire crackles softly, the boy sweeps near the door, and the keeper polishes a mug until it gleams. Outside, the shadows begin their slow stretch toward evening. Soon enough, you know the quiet will break. The benches will fill again, the fire will grow, and the air will thicken with voices and warmth. But for now, the tavern rests in the golden pause of the afternoon, the brief, unhurried heartbeat between the labors of day and the gathering of night. The afternoon's gold begins to cool shadows, stretching long and slow across the floorboards. Outside, the street sound changes again. A few sharper calls, the heavier tread of boots heading home, the creak of laden carts making their final rounds. The sun has not yet set, but the town is already tilting toward evening. Inside, the keeper rises from her brief rest. She moves to the hearth, takes the poker in hand, and stirs the settled logs until a fresh burst of orange rolls outward. The fire answers with a sharper crackle, releasing a rush of heat that reaches the furthest tables. She adds 2 thick logs and leans them together so their edges catch quickly. The boy appears from the back with an armload of kindling, crouches low, and tucks it into the spaces between the larger pieces. Soon the flames leap higher, their flicker painting the beams overhead. The spindle woman by the window gathers her wool into the basket at her feet. She stretches her fingers, flexing them after hours of work, and glances toward the door as if deciding whether to leave or remain for the night's livelier hours. The cat takes her place as she stands hopping onto the bench and curling where the last of the sun pools through the glass. The keeper moves through the room with renewed energy, setting fresh trenchers on the bar, arranging mugs, checking that the candles are ready for lighting. In the kitchen, the work quickens, knives clicking against boards, the heavy thump of a pestle grinding spice, the faint metallic ring of a pot lid set down with care. New scents begin to join the day-old warmth of bread and wood smoke, the rich fat of meat, browning the sharper note of onions, sizzling a thread of rosemary drifting from some hidden corner. From outside comes the first knock of the evening, not the light tap of a delivery boy, but the firm rap of someone eager to be let in. The boy lifts the bar and admits a man in a weather-stained cloak. He stomps his boots at the threshold, the last slush of the day, clinging stubbornly to the soles, then makes his way straight to the hearth without pause. A second follows close behind a woman carrying a covered basket that releases a faint smell of fresh-baked pie when she sets it on the bar. She exchanges a few words with the keeper, leaves the basket there, and claims a seat with a mug in hand. The scribe returns, the same man who left earlier in the afternoon. His satchel is a little heavier now, perhaps with new work gathered in town. He greets the keeper quietly and settles into the same table he had before, spreading his parchment in the growing glow of the fire. By now, the light outside has deepened enough that the candles are lit. The boy moves from table to table with a small taper coaxing each wick into a steady flame. Their glow adds to the fire's reach, painting the room in warm amber and softening the edges of the evening faces. Shadows crowd closer to the walls, leaving the center of the room an island of light. The first voices of night begin to mingle. A group of 3 enters 2 men and a woman, their cloaks smelling faintly of horse and road dust. They take a table near the door, ordering bread, cheese, and ale without consulting a menu they already know by heart. Their laughter starts quietly, as if testing the air, then rises as they recall some shared joke from the road. Soon after, 2 older men in heavy wool cloaks arrive together, moving with the unhurried pace of those who have known each other for years. They choose the corner nearest the fire, unpin their cloaks, and lean back as the heat begins to unknot their shoulders. They speak little at first, content to watch the room fill. The sound level rises gradually. The soft scrape of benches against the floor joins the steady clink of mugs and the gentle rumble of overlapping conversations. From the kitchen, the aromas deepen, and a new rhythm of footsteps begins the back and forth of serving food to the growing crowd. The door swings open again, and the dice players from the night before return. They carry the same easy camaraderie, slipping into their seats with the air of men picking up a conversation mid-sentence. The boy delivers their cups before they've even settled the familiarity of their order, part of the tavern's memory. As the last of the daylight fades, the street outside grows quieter. Those who come in now do so with the deliberate step of people choosing where to spend their evening. Each arrival brings a small gust of cool air, enough to make the candles flicker. The keeper greets each one with the same blend of warmth and measured watchfulness, her eyes taking in faces both known and new. The spindle woman has decided to stay after all. Her basket rests under the bench, and she's speaking now with the scribe at the next table, quiet, measured words, perhaps about work, perhaps about nothing at all. The cat slips past their feet, tail high, disappearing toward the back room. From somewhere near the hearth, a burst of laughter rings out louder than the room has yet reached. A man gestures broadly with his hands, his tail carried along by the warmth of drink. His companions lean in, hanging on every twist of his words. Around them, other conversations swell in response as if encouraged by the sound. The boy carries in a fresh loaf from the kitchen, its crust still crackling from the oven. He tears it into thick pieces, sets them on a trencher, and carries them to a table where they vanish in eager hands, almost before the steam has left them. The scent rolls outward, drawing a glance from nearly every table. The keeper takes a moment at the bar, resting one hand on the plank as she surveys the room. The fire is high now, the candles steady, the tables well filled. The transition is complete. The tavern has shed its quiet afternoon skin and stepped fully into its evening self. Outside, the sky has gone from deep blue to black, the stars just beginning to show through the narrow gaps between the buildings. The night's work is only beginning for the tavern, but already it hums with the warm, steady rhythm that will carry it into the hours ahead. The evening crowd thickens like the slow filling of a tide pool. Every bench that was empty an hour ago is claimed now, every table marked with a mug, a trencher, or the splay of hands in conversation. The fire roars high, a living thing in the hearth, and the candlelight presses back the shadows until only the farthest corners keep their secrets. The room is warmer than it has been all day, not just from the fire, but from the sheer body heat of so many gathered close. Cloaks hang from pegs, and the backs of chairs dripping the last of the day's damp onto the floor. Boots leave small dark prints near the door before the boards swallow them into the general scuff and creak of movement. The dice players are in full swing, the soft clatter of their throws, punctuated by bursts of laughter or mock groans. Coins slide across the table with an ease born of familiarity. No one here fears losing a night's supper in a game they've played 100 times before. The scribe has abandoned his writing for the moment, leaning in to listen to the spindle woman's story. His ink-stained fingers curled loosely around a mug. In the kitchen, the work hums at a higher pitch. A pot is lifted from the fire with a grunt, ladles dipping deep to fill bowls thick with stew. The scent rolls into the common room with each arrival, beef slow cooked until it falls apart, onions sweetened by the long simmer herbs, releasing their warmth into the air. Trencher after trencher is carried out, steam curling upward before it's chased by eager hands. At one table, a pair of travelers in road-dusty cloaks share a meal in comfortable silence. Now and then, one gestures toward the map they've spread between them, tracing a route with the point of a knife before resuming their slow chewing. The map's edges curl in the heat, its surface marked with notes and stains from years of travel. Closer to the hearth, a group of locals has gathered for something that sits between conversation and performance. A man in a patched jerkin leans forward, his hands sketching shapes in the air as he spins a tale, something about a merchant, a ship lost at sea, and a debt that refuses to sink. His companions react in perfect rhythm, a laugh here, a sharp intake of breath there, each one feeding the story's momentum. The ballad singer from the previous night sits among them, humming now and then, as though underscoring the tale's most dramatic turns. The keeper moves through the crowd with practiced grace, never hurried, but never still. She knows where every cup sits, who's ready for another, who's talking so intently they won't notice their drink going cold. The boy follows in her wake, ferrying empties to the back, returning with bread and mugs, dodging hands cloaks, and the occasional wandering dog that noses in from the street before being gently steered out again. The air grows thicker with heat and scent. Wood smoke curls lazily toward the rafters where it mingles with the sweet, yeasty note of bread and the sharper tang of ale. Laughter swells and ebbs like a tide. Somewhere in the mix, a lute begins to play again, the musician from the night before plucking out a lively tune that cuts cleanly through the overlapping voices. The music shifts the room's rhythm. Feet tap under tables, fingers drum on wood, and a few voices try to join in with snatches of half-remembered lyrics. At one point, a man with a voice like gravel calls for a song everyone seems to know. The lute obliges, and soon the refrain catches across the room, ragged but enthusiastic. The words are older than most who sing them, their meaning less important than the shared sound of many voices carrying the same tune. Not every corner is caught in the song. In the farthest reach of the room, two men sit close, their heads nearly touching. Their mugs are barely touched, their voices low and urgent. Now and then one glances toward the door before returning to the conversation. It's not suspicion so much as habit in a place like this. You keep an eye on entrances even when the company is warm. The spindle woman and the scribe have been joined by a younger man in a fine, if travel-creased coat. His voice carries a different cadence, polished, deliberate, as he asks about local routes and the state of the winter roads. The spindle woman answers with the confidence of someone who knows every hill and market day within a day's travel, her words weaving maps more vivid than the ones the travelers keep folded in their satchels. Outside, the night has deepened, the street lamp torches glowing steady in the damp air. Each time the door opens, a brief draft steals in, swirling the candle flames before vanishing into the room's warm press. The laughter seems louder in contrast, the fire's heat more welcome. The dice players cheer as one of their number rolls a rare winning throw. The coins clink across the table into his hands, and he lifts his mug in a mock solemn salute to his friends before setting the dice tumbling again. At the next table, someone bangs the flat of their hand against the wood, in emphasis to a point, drawing a ripple of amusement from those nearest. The musician shifts to a slower tune, giving the crowd a chance to breathe. Conversations grow fuller in the spaces between the notes, the lull inviting stories that had been waiting for a pause. A man near you recounts a hunt gone wrong, or perhaps very right, depending on the truth of his boasts, and the table answers with knowing grins. The keeper stops briefly at the bar to speak with a man who has just arrested a merchant by the look of him, with a heavy purse at his belt and a cautious eye for the room. She gestures toward a corner table, and he slips into it without further prompting. Soon another joins him, and their quiet negotiation begins invisible to all but the most attentive. The hour turns without notice. The warmth in the tavern is complete now, the outside world reduced to the occasional cool breath through the open door. The music, the laughter, the clink of mugs, all of it folds together into the sound of a night at full strength. Here, in the peak of the evening, the tavern is what it has always been, a refuge, a market of words and warmth, a small, bright island in the long medieval dark. The room is still bright and full, but the first hints of change drift in quietly, like a subtle draft through a shutter's crack. You notice it in the way some laughter has begun to fade faster than it rises, or how the lute player pauses a moment longer between tunes to take a slow drink. The air is still warm and busy, but it carries a faint undercurrent of weariness, not yet enough to slow the night, but enough for you to feel its direction. The dice players' cheers are less frequent now. The coin piles have thinned, and a few of the men sit back with mugs in hand rather than dice in fist. One leans on his elbow, staring into the middle distance, while his companion recounts some tale from earlier in the day. They still smile, but with the easy looseness of men who know they've played enough for tonight. At the corner table, the merchant pair have finished their quiet negotiation. A small pouch passes hands clasped firmly before disappearing into a cloak. They speak a little longer, then stand together, making their way toward the door. Their cloaks are fastened tight, their hoods pulled up before they step out into the night. The keeper watches them go, her expression unreadable. She turns back to the bar where a small stack of emptied mugs waits. She takes her time wiping each one clean, setting them mouth down in a neat line. The boy brings her another, still warm, from a patron's hand, and she adds it to the line without looking up. The spindle woman is still talking with the scribe, though her basket now rests closed at her feet. She leans on one elbow, her words moving at a slower pace, her gaze occasionally drifting toward the fire. The scribe listens intently, though his hands no longer fidget with parchment or pen. Their conversation has settled into that comfortable rhythm where pauses feel as natural as speech. At the hearth, the patched jerkin storyteller is drawing his long tale to a close. He sits back in his chair, letting his final words hang a moment, before he lifts his mug in a small, almost private toast to the friends around him. They answer in kind, some with mugs, some with nods. A few stand to stretch the sudden movement, sending shadows swaying along the walls. The lute player begins a softer tune now, something without a clear ending, a looping melody that can fade at any point without breaking the mood. It suits the shift in the room. Conversations shrink to smaller knots, the big communal moments giving way to pairs and trios leaning closer together. From the kitchen comes the low, steady sound of cleanup water sloshing in a basin, the muted clink of spoons and knives. The heavy scents of the evening meal still hang in the air, but they've mellowed, blending into the ever-present wood smoke. Occasionally, a sharper smell breaks through vinegar on a wiped-down board, a twist of citrus peel in a mug of warmed wine. The door opens now, less often, and mostly to let people out. A couple near the door pull on their cloaks and step into the street, their voices fading quickly. Two younger men leave together, talking low and fast, their boots tapping a quick rhythm until the night swallows them. Each exit takes a little heat and sound with it, though the tavern still feels far from empty. The boy is slower now, too. He lingers at tables collecting empties in a more deliberate circuit rather than his earlier zigzag through the crowd. Now and then he pauses near the hearth, holding his hands out to the flames as though absorbing enough warmth for the last stretch of the night. The keeper makes her own slow round, stopping here and there for a short word with a lingering guest. At one table, she places a hand briefly on a man's shoulder, a gesture of quiet thanks or farewell. At another, she listens to a remark and gives a quick laugh before moving on. Her presence is steady, her awareness of the room unbroken even in this gentler phase of the evening. The cat appears again, slipping between benches, tail brushing the boots of a traveler lost in conversation. It finds a warm spot near the scribe's chair and folds itself into a neat circle. The scribe absent-mindedly reaches down to scratch its head mid-sentence. The cat purrs a faint, steady sound that somehow cuts through the general murmur. Outside, the street is quieter than before. When the door opens now, you hear more of the night's stillness than its bustle. A distant shout echoes faintly, then nothing more. The damp cold presses in a little harder each time the latch lifts. In the farthest corner, the fine-coated traveler from earlier has fallen silent, his mug nearly empty. His gaze is distant, as if his thoughts have wandered far beyond the tavern's walls. The spindle woman notices, says something softly, and he rouses with a smile. But it's the kind of smile given when the mind has already begun to leave the room. The lute's looping tune winds down to its last few measures. The musician sets the instrument aside, flexes his fingers, and takes a long drink. He doesn't pack it away yet. Perhaps he knows he might play once more before the night is done. But for now, his work rests. The fire still burns steady, but the logs are settling low. The boy crouches to add a few more, the flames flaring briefly before settling into a gentler crackle. The light shifts with them, shadows deepening in the beams overhead. The tavern feels smaller now, not in size but in presence. The edges have drawn inward. The voices are softer, the laughter warmer but less frequent. It's the natural narrowing that comes after a night's high point, the slow gathering of the evening's last lingering threads before they too are tucked away. The tavern is not empty, but the fullness has thinned to something you can count in glances. The larger tables hold only 2 or 3 apiece now. Some benches sit bare altogether, their surfaces gleaming faintly in the low firelight. The sound Mamas shifted to no longer a dense weave of talk and laughter, but a looser scattering of low voices pauses, stretching longer between words. The dice players have packed away their game. One traces idle patterns on the table with the edge of his mug, while another picks at the bread crusts left on a trencher. They still speak, but in the gentle murmur of friends with no need to fill the air. Eventually, one stands, stretching his back, and pulls on his cloak. A short clasp of hands, a shared smile, and he's gone into the night. Near the hearth, the patched jerkin storyteller leans back in his chair, arms folded loosely. His earlier vigor has softened into a slow sway as he listens to the last of his companions. When their talk winds down, he nods, finishes the last of his ale, and sets the mug down with a quiet finality. The keeper passing by catches the signal and offers a small nod in return. The spindle woman and the scribe linger still. Their words have grown fewer, their tone softer. She reaches down to gather her basket, settling it on her lap. The scribe, sensing the conversation's end, tucks his notes and pen away, his fingers lingering a moment on the folded parchment before sliding it into his satchel. Their chairs scrape gently on the boards as they rise together, offering parting words that melt into the room's quiet. In the far corner, the fine-coated traveler is alone now. He sits with his mug nearly empty, rolling it absently between his palms. His gaze is fixed on the fire, though his mind seems far from it. When he finally stands, his departure is silent, save for the faint jingle of coins on the bar. The lute player hasn't touched his instrument again. Instead, he sits near the wall, hands resting on the polished wood of the lute's body. He watches the few remaining guests with an easy detachment, sipping his drink in slow, thoughtful swallows. It's not a performer's watch now, just a man letting the night take its course. The boy moves quietly between the remaining tables, collecting empties with a care that avoids breaking the fragile calm. He stacks mugs 2 at a time, trenchers under one arm, and carries them to the kitchen without hurry. When he returns, he pauses near the hearth, hands stretched to the warmth, as if drawing one last reserve of heat for the closing work ahead. The keeper begins her final evening circuit. She speaks in low tones to those still seated, her words half farewell, half reminder that the night is slipping toward its end. At one table, she shares a short laugh, but her steps do not linger. She's already moving toward the bar, her eyes sweeping the room for any last needs to be met. Outside, the street is nearly silent now. When the door opens, the night enters with a deeper chill, sharper than before. You can smell the faint metallic tang of frost forming on stone and wood. The few who leave at this hour do so with quick steps, their shapes vanishing into the shadows beyond the tavern's lantern light. The fire has settled into a bed of glowing coals, their edges blurring into the black of the hearth. Now and then a coal cracks with a small sharp sound, sending a faint spray of sparks upward before falling back into the glow. The keeper crouches to rake them together, coaxing their heat into a tighter nest. She adds a single log, not to blaze, but to smolder through the last hour. At one table, a pair of friends lean in close, their heads nearly touching, as they share some last story too private for the earlier din. They speak without glancing around, as if the tavern has contracted to just the space between them. Their mugs are nearly empty. They make no move to refill them. The cat wanders in from the back, stretching long before curling itself in its usual place near the hearth. Its purr is a steady hum, softer than the fire's crackle, but insistent in its comfort. The boy steps around it carefully, balancing a tray as he clears another table. The keeper straightens from the hearth and crosses to the bar. She sets her hands flat on the wood for a moment, taking in the room's quieter shape. There's no rush now. The night's rhythm is winding itself down without her needing to push it. Still, her gaze follows each lingering guest, measuring how close they are to rising. One of the last dice players drains his mug and sets it down with a small nod toward the keeper. She acknowledges him with the faintest smile, then returns to her work. The man pulls on his cloak and departs, leaving the dice table empty for the first time tonight. The spindle woman, the scribe, the fine-coated traveler, all gone now. The patched jerkin storyteller is gone too. What remains are the quiet pairs and solitary drinkers, each absorbed in their own small bubble of thought. From the kitchen, the sound of washing grows louder. Pots and pans ring dully as they're stacked, the water splashing in deeper basins. The smells of the night's cooking linger in the warm air, but they're fading under the stronger scent of wood smoke and the faint, clean bite of damp timber. You sense the balance tipping toward stillness. The air feels a little looser, as though the tavern itself is preparing to stretch and relax after holding so much life in its walls all evening. The keeper glances toward the door, not in expectation of new arrivals, but in quiet assurance that it can be closed soon without protest. The lute player finally rises, sliding the instrument into its cloth wrapping. He nods to the keeper, speaks a short word, and heads for the door. The latch clicks shut behind him, the cold outside rushing in for an instant, before it's barred away again. What remains now is a tavern leaning into the last hour of its night. Smaller, softer, its warmth gathered close to the hearth, waiting for the final voices to fade so it can settle into the deep, holding quiet that belongs only to itself. The hour has narrowed to its smallest point. The few who remain speak so softly, their words are almost part of the fire's own low murmur. The air holds a steady warmth, but it's no longer fed by the bustle of bodies, just the hearth, the banked coals pulsing red beneath the last log's glow. One of the final pairs stands. Their chairs scrape gently against the boards, the sound seeming louder in the sparser quiet. Cloaks are drawn close, coins set discreetly on the table. The keeper steps forward to meet them near the door, offering a parting word in the same low register the room now keeps. She bars the door again after they leave her hands moving, with the ease of a gesture done countless nights before. The dice table is empty. The hearthside chairs are half turned toward the heat, but unclaimed. The spindle woman's window bench stands bare, her wool basket long since carried home. Even the scribe's table with its neatly stacked parchment is dark, now the candle there long extinguished. A single man remains near the far wall, his cloak draped loosely over his shoulders. He stares into his mug as though it still holds something worth studying, though it has been empty for some time. The boy approaches him quietly, asking a question you can't hear. The man blinks, nods once, and sets the mug down. He rises slowly, stretching as though waking from a long sit. At the bar, he places a few coins in the keeper's waiting hand before stepping into the night. The latch falls into place behind him with a muffled thud. The door is barred now for the last time tonight. No one else will enter. No one else will leave. The keeper exhales quietly, her gaze moving slowly over the room, as though seeing it anew without its occupants. She tucks a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then gathers the nearest mugs into a small stack and carries them toward the kitchen. The boy, knowing the night's final work, moves without needing instruction. He sweeps the benches with a quick, practiced pass, gathering crumbs into a neat little pile before whisking them away. Trencher scraps are cleared and carried off, their faint scent of bread and gravy fading into the background of the room. The fire's flames have dropped low, licking gently at the edges of the last log. The keeper crouches before it, with the poker drawing the glowing coals together into a tighter bed. She lays a half-split piece of oak over them, not to blaze, but to burn slow enough to keep the embers alive until morning. A little burst of sparks lifts and settles like a sigh from the fire itself. The cat pads in from the back, weaving between the keeper's ankles before settling by the hearth. Its purr is the loudest sound in the room for a moment. The boy steps around it carefully, with a basin in his hands, the water inside sloshing quietly as he heads for the back door to empty it. From the kitchen, you hear the muted clink of mugs set onto a shelf, the scrape of a pot placed back into its corner. The sounds are different now from the rush of service, slower final, the tidy punctuation of a day's work. The keeper returns to the common room and wipes each table with a damp cloth. She moves methodically, pausing to straighten a bench, here nudge a stool back under the bar there. Her hand lingers on the wood for a moment at each spot, as if pressing a small seal of order onto the place before the night takes it. When she finishes, she steps back to the center of the room. For a heartbeat, she simply stands there, looking at the empty benches, the quiet hearth, the faint gleam of candle stubs waiting for tomorrow's light. She seems to hold the silence like something fragile in her hands before she lets it go. The boy returns, rubbing his hands together against the chill from the yard. The keeper nods toward the stairs, sending him up ahead of her. He yawns as he climbs, his feet heavy on the worn boards. The door to the sleeping rooms creaks faintly as it shuts behind him. The keeper takes one last walk through the space. She glances toward the shuttered windows, checks the latch on the back door, runs her fingertips along the cool stone near the hearth. At the bar, she gathers the night's coins into a small pouch and tucks it away. The weight is not heavy, but it's enough the day's measure in her palm. Finally, she douses the candles one by one. Their smoke twists upward in slow curls before fading into the rafters. The room dims with each snuffed flame until only the red glow from the hearth remains painting the low beams in faint copper. She stands a moment longer, her face lit by the coals. Then she turns toward the back, the cat following at her heels. The door closes behind her with the softest of clicks, leaving the common room alone with its own deep quiet. The tavern breathes once more, a settling sigh, the creak of old timbers, the faint hiss of cooling ash. Outside, the night presses close against the shutters, its cold wrapping the building like a second skin. Inside, the heat from the day lingers in the air, and in the wood, holding the memory of voices, laughter, and the steady hum of life until the cycle begins again. And so the tavern sleeps. The benches, bare and waiting, hold the shape of the people who warmed them hours ago. The hearth glows faintly, its coals curled into themselves like a hand at rest. Every surface has gone still. Every sound has slipped into the kind of silence that has weight to it. The cat shifts once in its chosen spot, curling tighter into the gentle heat. Upstairs, the boy is already asleep, his breathing slow and even in the small loft room. The keeper lies awake a little longer, listening for the sounds she has learned to trust, the creak of the roof beams in the cool, the quiet thump of the wind at the shutters, the steady, unbroken hush that says the tavern is safe for the night. Beyond the thick door, the medieval street is nearly empty. The frost grows quiet and deliberate along the cobbles and eaves. The moonlight drapes the silent market square in silver. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The rest of the world has given itself over to the slow hours before dawn. Inside the tavern keeps its own slow heartbeat. The air still holds the echo of firelight, the smell of ale, the faintest trace of baked bread. The walls cradle the day just past, tucking it away into the long memory that timber and stone carry across years. Tomorrow will bring its own bustle, its own stories, its own laughter and quiet. But tonight, the tavern simply rests, and maybe so should you. Let the glow of the fire behind your eyes fade. Let your thoughts drift down like ash into still coals. The world outside can wait. The night is long enough. Sleep is already here.